So friends, for today's video, I wanted to go through some things that I definitely think we get a lot less of in gaming these days, and we used to get a lot more of them, and I honestly miss them, and I kind of want them to make a comeback. I do want to be clear that I think gaming it's at such a peak right now. We have so many amazing games. It's so easy to go back and access some of your favorite games from before, and being able to play online with other people, it's pretty seamless in a lot of games. It's really a great way to stay connected to your friends and to play games with your friends and experience a game in a whole other way. I've said before, I love Elden Ring. I had so much fun. Maybe that's not the right word to describe it, but I really enjoyed, at the very least, playing through Elden Ring alone. And then when I went to replay Elden Ring, I played it alongside my husband who hadn't played, and just being able to play online together, it's like you get to experience the game all over again, but in a fresh and different way. So gaming is phenomenal right now, but there's just some things I miss that I wish we had more of. And I wanted to start actually by talking about multiplayer and couch co-op. Because we get so much online accessibility these days, and because we can play with people that live outside our homes, it feels like games don't really make a whole lot of effort anymore to either have the whole game be centered around couch co-op or just have a form of couch co-op, a form of multiplayer where you can have somebody in your whole household playing with you, or if somebody comes over, they can play with you in person. And I miss that. Every now and then, my husband and we just specifically go looking for games where we can be in the same room together, because we do have it set up where we can play games where one of us is in one room and the other one's in the other, but that just sometimes feels really ridiculous. And a game I know had great couch co-op was Diablo. It was my first time ever playing Diablo, and I actually was really impressed with how well you could play with people that were with you and play online. I thought that was incredible. Diablo was just not really my type of game that I gravitate toward, but I know there are games out there that have it. When they do have it, though, sometimes it can be very limited. I know, for example, a lot of the Battlefront games, I do like the couch co-op that you can do, but it can sometimes be where you don't really get that many maps, or you get tired of doing the same thing over and over again. You wish you could do entire missions together and that they were actually worthwhile and interesting, and I just miss that about games. I wish we had a lot more of them. By the way, if you have recommendations that you feel remedy the things that I'm talking about, feel free to leave them. And then also, if you want to vent about some of the things that you miss in gaming, feel free to mention those as well. The next thing I wanted to mention is just classic turn-based combat. It feels like nobody wants to commit to turn-based these days, but I think some games are hesitant to be true action RPGs, and so their combat system sits somewhere in the middle, and sometimes that somewhere in the middle works, other times it's horrendous, other times it feels pointless, other times you're like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing, this is too complicated, just let it be true turn-based, because some of them it depends on like the angle that you're coming to the enemy from. Other ones you can set it up where it's kind of automatic, and then you just every now and then press a button when one of the side characters gets some kind of overdrive or move up to a certain point, and then if you press the button at the same time, they do a combo together, whatever, and you're like, I mean, it's fine, but either just let me control one character and have different combinations of moves, or just make it turn-based. I don't know why we're so hesitant, but I don't mind if it's especially a really fantastic story in a game, an RPG, I don't mind if the combat is just my turn, your turn. I don't mind if it's more strategic. I don't mind if you have to keep track of, there's this status ailment, you have to use this to cancel it, but you can also preemptively, if you know that enemy or the enemies in this area are known for that, you can have something equipped that helps with that. I like the strategizing for combat, and I think that is a nice juxtaposition to the more action-oriented combat systems. I don't need this weird hybrid unless you're going to do it well, but nowadays it doesn't always feel like it's done well. It can be done well, but sometimes it just feels like they're trying too hard to do something unique. Just go back to the basics. You don't always need it, especially if that's not the point of the game. Moving on though, so I don't just repeat myself over and over again. I mentioned if the game is extremely story-driven, oftentimes the combat system isn't necessarily what people are picking the game up for, and I kind of want to touch on that, story-driven games. So I'm not by any means trying to claim we don't have any more story-driven games, because that's not true. But I do think there is almost this dismissal of story-driven games nowadays. Like, real gamers play the games that are From Software type, the Soulsborne type games. And story-based games, it seems as though they're not valued anymore because we're all expecting everything to be, and I'm being very hyperbolic when I say we're all expecting, but it can feel as though sometimes if it's not fitting in with whatever the popular current type of game is, then it's less than. And I understand that gaming, because we're looking to have some kind of physical call and response, you could say. Something happens in the game and we have to react. We have to time it. We have to get better. We have to build skill. And while I understand that and I like that about gaming, sometimes there's something to be said of what is basically an interactive story experience. And that's a great way for people to get introduced to gaming also. It's a great way for younger generations to get into games. It's just phenomenal, I think, as somebody who loves stories and who loves books, and that's what really pulls at my heart and really makes me fall in love with a game, is when it has a really great story. It's not the only thing, of course, but what can make something hit and have a lot of impact. I just wish that we were more willing to have more games like that, and that as a community we would get behind them. It's totally fine to say that sometimes the combat can be boring, the leveling up system can be boring, whatever the case may be. You can still have your criticisms, but in the same breath of, I can criticize Elden Ring for having its story kind of difficult to find, but yet I love how great it is to explore that game, how there's so much to do. And so I think you can also say, okay, maybe the combat isn't the most interesting, or maybe the gameplay is a little bit dull, but the story, I feel like it's fair to have both those things without one automatically being given more recognition and more praise. Next up, we have side-scrollers. I love Metroid Dread. I thought Metroid Dread, speaking of games where it's like you have to build skill, and the game, the pacing of which the skill develops is perfect. I loved Metroid Dread. And then every now and then I'm like, what other games are there like Metroid Dread? And I'll try them and I'm like, none of these are as good. I think Ori and the Blind Forest is phenomenal. I think Metroid Dread is phenomenal. And then it just feels like there's a big drop from there. If you have recommendations, feel free to leave them, because I've tried some and they just really weren't scratching that itch. But more side-scroller, pretty simple, not a whole lot else I need to add. After that, just basic fighting games. I brought this up in a video talking about Tekken 8, where I've loved Tekken since I was a kid. Tekken Tag is still to this day my favorite. If you just remade Tekken Tag, or you took that same formula and you had other characters, that's all I need. That's all I need. And it feels like Injustice, a lot of the superhero fighting games, a lot, and I think also, of course, Super Smash Brothers. There's so much going on, and I'm like, I don't need so much going on. I just want to be able to master combos and then have my mastery go up against someone else's mastery, or, you know, the computer, you could say, its mastery. I kind of miss that. I miss it being a little bit smaller in scope and not being quite as extravagant, not having these super moves that you can start if you are really close to the edge of the arena, or if a character has gotten your health low, then you can press a certain button and then that makes this new thing, and if the person isn't blocked, then you basically take out half their health. I don't like that. I just want basic fighting games. I miss basic fighting games. They're fun. And then last for today would be meaningful cutscenes. So what I mean by this is, do any of you remember when I always, as a little kid, I called it realistic mode. Whenever a game had cutscenes that typically looked one way, but then every now and then you'd get a special cutscene where all of a sudden it looked way more realistic, and you're like, oh, this must be important. And you didn't know what was coming, but you just knew, like, oh my gosh, something's about to happen, because all of a sudden the graphics got way better. And there would be this big thing that you were like, oh my gosh. And then you're like, why didn't I should have saved it right before so that I'm not kidding. And I know I'm going off in a lot of different directions and very loudly. I'm not kidding. As a kid, I would have multiple saves just in case there was a cutscene, so I could go back and rewatch that cutscene, like the really, really beautiful cutscenes. Because of course nowadays you can just look them up on the internet and rewatch them there if you want. But I couldn't do that when I was a little kid. So I would go back and then watch the cutscenes and be like, oh, it's so cool, or oh, it's so pretty. And usually there was something impactful happening in that moment that was significant to the story or the characters. And I don't really feel like we get that now. We are spoiled. We're very spoiled with our cinematic trailers. For example, The Witcher, The Wild Hunt, the cinematic trailers, I still go back and watch those, and I'm like, can this have just been, instead of Netflix, can we have just, instead of their adaptation, can we have just gotten more of this from CD Projekt Red? Because I would have watched that for sure, over and over again. That would be amazing. But the cutscenes in games, it feels like they're rare these days. To that degree is what I mean. I'm not saying cutscenes are rare, but I mean that kind of cutscene where you're like, what's about to happen? I love those. I love those. And it just feels like we don't get them as much anymore. And maybe it's just the games I've been playing. I don't know, but I miss those kinds of cutscenes. But anyway, those are some random things that I miss in gaming. Like I said, if you have any recommendations for things that you think go against the grain, that go against the thing I'm complaining about, and actually I would probably enjoy, feel free to leave your recommendations. And then also I would love to know what random things annoy you. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.